I never thought I would live to see the day when the children I carried in my body, fed with my hands, protected with every breath I ever took, would stand at the doorway of the home I helped them build and look at me with the kind of coldness that strangers reserve for people blocking their way. The morning light was barely rising when I stepped out of my small bedroom, still tying my robe, expecting another ordinary day of making breakfast, watering the plants, checking on my granddaughter's drawings hanging crookedly on the fridge. Instead, I saw my son standing near the front door, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, avoiding my eyes as he pressed the elevator call button again and again, as though the lift held an answer he did not want to find inside himself. And when the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, he stepped aside in a rigid motion and nodded once toward the hallway. I took one step forward and then froze because right outside the apartment door, lined along the building's dim corridor and spilling into the street beyond the stairwell, I saw my suitcases, all three of them. The old gray one with the broken zipper, the floral one I used when I visited my sister years ago, and the faded brown suitcase that still smelled faintly of cedar. They sat there in the cold morning air, their handles tangled, their wheels resting on cracked pavement, as if they had been left by someone who had rushed away without caring whether they rolled into the gutter. I stared at them for a full heartbeat before my mind could even understand that the belongings packed inside were mine. That someone had taken my clothes, my framed photographs, my neatly folded sweaters, my slippers, and forced them into those suitcases without my knowledge. I turned to my son slowly, expecting confusion or shock or an explanation that would make sense of it all, but he would not look at me. His wife stepped forward instead, her expression composed too perfectly, her tone carrying a rehearsed calm that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. She said they needed space. She said they needed a fresh start. She said they needed a life without interference or reminders of the past. She said I was holding them back without intending to. She said sometimes a family needed boundaries to grow. But I heard nothing except the quiet click of a suitcase handle swaying in the wind, tapping lightly against the curb, as if knocking on a door that no longer belonged to me. I stood there unable to move, unable to breathe, staring at the street where people walked by glancing curiously, but pretending not to, because nothing makes a stranger more uncomfortable than the sight of a mother being discarded like old furniture. I looked at my son, searching for the boy who used to wrap his arms around my waist when he was frightened of thunderstorms, the boy who said he wanted to take care of me, when I was old, the boy who once cried because he accidentally broke my favorite mug. Instead, I saw a man whose face had been hardened by ambitions he had not achieved yet, fears he never shared with me, and a marriage that demanded he choose sides even when no war existed before. His wife placed her hand on his arm, a subtle reminder, and he finally looked at me with eyes emptied of warmth. He said they loved me. He said this was for the best. He said I would be happier somewhere else. The words fell too easily from his lips, as though he had practiced them in the mirror, until they no longer stung him. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out except a choked breath that sounded like a tiny fracture inside my chest. I stepped toward my suitcases slowly, as though approaching something fragile, something that had once been whole but was now scattered. I touched the handle of the floral suitcase and felt the cold metal bite into my palm. My entire life reduced to 3 bags on the street. My years of sacrifices, my decades of love, my countless sleepless nights, my quiet endurance, my entire existence on the sidewalk while the family I gave everything to watched from the doorway with the impatience of people waiting for a taxi that was late. I straightened my spine with what little dignity I could salvage and turned to face them. For a moment, the wind brushed my hair across my cheek, and I thought I might collapse under the weight of betrayal settling in my bones. But then something inside me hardened, not bitterness. Not rage, something older, something wiser, something that had carried me through crises long before they ever existed. I told them I understood. I told them I wished them well. I told them I hoped their new life brought them everything they desired. My voice did not shake. My tears did not fall. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross my son's face, as though some part of him realized that pushing a mother away is not as easy as placing her luggage on the curb. I picked up my suitcases one by one. People walked by and watched. A dog barked in the distance. A gust of wind pushed trash down the pavement, and my son stood there, silent, while I lifted the weight of the life he no longer wanted near him. I walked away without looking back. But even as I reached the street corner, my heart still felt tethered to the doorway behind me. I turned slightly. His wife was already closing the door. He made no move to stop her. And in the silence of that moment, I understood something that would shape the rest of the story. They thought they no longer needed me. They believed their life would flourish without my presence. They believed that the woman who had carried them through every storm was now unnecessary. But life has a way of revealing truths in the most unexpected ways. And as I walked down that street with my suitcases rolling unsteadily behind me, I did not yet know it. They did not yet know it. But the day would come when everything they built would begin to crumble, and they would remember the mother they threw away. Because sometimes the foundation people think is irrelevant is the only thing holding their world together. And when they remove it, everything else begins to fall. I walked for what felt like miles, even though the city blocks were short and familiar, each step echoing with the hollow rhythm of someone who had been unstitched from the place she thought she would grow old in. My suitcases rattled behind me, their wheels scraping along uneven pavement, as if protesting the weight they were forced to carry now that the hands that once packed them were trembling and tired. The morning sun rose higher, casting a pale gold across the street, illuminating everything except the heavy ache that had settled inside my chest. I passed storefronts just beginning to open, shopkeepers sweeping dust from their doorways, people rushing to catch buses, teenagers laughing and pushing each other playfully, all of them moving through their lives as though the world had not just shifted cruelly under my feet. I paused at a crosswalk and steadied myself, gripping the handles of my suitcases so tightly that the metal left faint impressions on my palms. I was not homeless. I was not helpless. But standing there on the curb with my belongings scattered at my feet, I felt something I had never felt before: untethered. It was a strange feeling for a woman who had always been the anchor of her family, the one who kept the home steady, the meals warm, the routines intact, the chaos soothed. Now the anchor had been cut loose, and I drifted through the morning like a small boat pushed toward a shoreline I did not recognize. I eventually reached the bus stop near the old bakery, the place where my son used to beg me for pastries when he was little, pointing eagerly at the glass case filled with glazed treats. I could still see his small hand pressed against the glass, his eyes wide with desire, his voice chirping that he would be good all week if I bought him a chocolate croissant. I always did. I never had much money, but I always found enough to make him smile. That memory stung now like a tender bruise, because the boy who once held my hand so tightly had grown into a man who could place my suitcases on the street without touching them long enough to feel their weight. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes, and I climbed on mechanically, dragging my suitcases behind me. The driver glanced at me with brief sympathy, but I avoided his gaze, choosing instead to sit near the back where the seats were cold and the windows streaked with condensation. I leaned my forehead lightly against the glass, watching the city blur past, the familiar streets twisting into unfamiliar emotions. I wondered where I would go, how long I would stay wherever I ended up, whether I would ever return to that building where I had cooked for them, cleaned for them, watched over their child, folded their laundry with care they never saw. But the truth was clearer than the morning light in that moment. I could never go back. Once a mother has been pushed out, truly pushed out, the door that closes is not just the one in the house. It is the door inside her heart that locks quietly behind her, sealing off whatever pieces she had given away. When I reached my sister's neighborhood, I hesitated before walking up to her small brick home. She opened the door with startled eyes, taking in my suitcases, my silence, the stiffness in my posture. She did not ask questions immediately. Instead, she guided me inside, set my bags down gently, and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. She poured tea, the fragrant steam curling into the air like a soft invitation to breathe. When I finally told her what happened, my voice sounded distant, as though I were reciting a story that had happened to someone else. She listened without interrupting, her face shifting between disbelief and protective fury. She said my son must have lost his mind. She said his wife must have manipulated him. She said no decent child would do such a thing. But her words washed over me like waves that reached the shore without leaving footprints. I was too numb, too hollow, too anchored in the disbelief of it all. Over the next few days, I stayed in her spare room, a space that smelled of lavender and quiet familiarity. I I tried to adjust to the rhythm of her home, the narrow hallway, the ticking of the clock on her wall, the clutter of her knitting supplies near the couch. My sister asked if I wanted to confront my son, if I wanted to call him, if I wanted to demand an explanation, but something inside me refused. I had spent years giving him patience, understanding, sacrifice, forgiveness. I had nothing left to give. A mother can endure many heartbreaks, but the moment her child chooses to discard her, the wound goes deeper than apology can reach. So I did not call, I did not text, I did not reach out. I existed in the quiet space between disbelief and acceptance, a place where grief grew slowly, like vines twisting around the heart. But silence has a strange way of revealing truths. And soon enough, whispers began to reach me through my sister's friends, through neighbors who knew my son's wife, through the small social circles that carry news faster than any phone call could. At first, the rumors seemed insignificant, a disagreement in their building, a failed business venture my son had invested in, a childcare dispute, but then the whispers grew louder, heavier, more tangled. Financial strain, arguments late into the night, missed payments, tension between the couple, something fragile cracking beneath the surface of their carefully curated life. My sister looked at me with warning in her eyes when she heard these things, as if she feared I might feel satisfaction in their struggles. But I felt nothing of the sort. I felt only the slow, quiet ache of a mother who knew that pain was inevitable when children cast aside the person who once held their world together. I kept my distance, watching from the safety of my sister's home as their life began to tilt, unsteady and uncertain. I did not reach out, I did not intervene. I let the silence stretch because sometimes distance is the only medicine left for a heart that has been shattered. And though I could not yet see the whole truth, though I did not yet understand how deeply their decisions would unravel, something inside me knew that life has a way of teaching lessons in the places where arrogance once stood. I had wished them luck when they pushed me away, but luck is a fragile thing when a family tears out its own foundation. The days blended into one another with a strange quietness, the kind that settles in a home where someone is healing from a wound nobody can see, yet everyone can feel. My sister tried to keep me company with small talk, cups of tea, gentle questions she never pushed too hard, and soft blankets she draped over my legs when I sat too long staring at nothing. But grief does not move at anyone else's pace. It lingers in the corners of a room, inside the pauses between sentences, inside the moments when the mind drifts back to a scene it has not yet learned how to release. I replayed that morning over and over, the dull thud of my suitcases hitting pavement, the hollow echo in my son's voice when he said they needed their own life, the way his wife guided him inside as though closing a curtain on a performance that had finally ended. For years, I had served as their foundation, the one who woke early to make breakfast, who cleaned the home they barely had time to maintain, who soothed the baby, when she cried through the night, who stepped quietly around their schedule so they could sleep late on weekends, who kept their lives functioning without them, noticing how many pieces I held together. But in their eyes, I had become an obstacle instead of a pillar, a reminder of responsibilities they did not want, a presence too familiar to appreciate and too easy to discard. It was nearly 2 weeks after I moved into my sister's home that the cracks in their perfect world widened enough for strangers to start noticing. My sister came into my room one morning holding her phone tightly, her expression carrying that careful mix of concern and hesitation she used whenever she had news she was afraid I might not want to hear. She sat beside me on the bed and explained that one of her friends had seen my son and his wife arguing loudly in their car outside the grocery store. She described a fight so heated the windows fogged, their gestures sharp and frustrated, their child crying in the back seat while they yelled over each other. I felt a dull ache rise inside me, not because their life was unraveling, but because the unraveling was happening with no one to soften it. I had been the one to separate them gently when disagreements escalated, the one to soothe their frustrations before they spilled into anger, the one to hold the baby so she would not be frightened by raised voices. Without me, the friction between their personalities had no place to rest, no buffer to ease its sharp edges. Soon more stories drifted toward me like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Their landlord had approached them about late rent payments, something that had never happened before because I was the one who always reminded them of due dates, and handled their budgeting when they fell behind. The babysitter had quit unexpectedly after my son's wife argued with her over scheduling, leaving them scrambling to find childcare and missing work shifts they could not afford to lose. A neighbor mentioned overhearing my granddaughter crying late at night while her parents argued in the kitchen, their voices rising in frustration, as if the walls that once held their family together were now too thin to contain the tension building inside. I listened to all of it in silence, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart a mixture of sorrow and quiet knowing. My sister asked me multiple times whether I planned to reach out, whether I wanted to call and check on the little one, whether I felt compelled to step in before their situation worsened. But every time she asked, the memory of my suitcases on the street returned with startling clarity. I could not walk back into a home where I had been exiled like an unwanted guest. I could not offer help to a family that had made it painfully clear they no longer wanted my presence. A mother can forgive many things, but she cannot force her way back into the life she was pushed out of. So I stayed silent, letting the wave of their struggles roll forward without my hands to steady it. One afternoon, as I sat with my sister folding laundry, the phone in my pocket vibrated. When I saw my son's name on the screen, my breath stopped. For a moment, I could not move, could not blink, could not think. I let it ring until it stopped. Then he called again and again. Each call went unanswered, not out of spite, but because I could not bring myself to hear whatever version of him might be on the other end of the line. Was it regret? Was it anger? Was it desperation? Or worse, was he calling because he realized there were tasks he needed me to take care of? I could not bear the thought of being reached out to only in moments of convenience, so I let my phone fall silent on the table. The next day he texted. Long messages, apologies tangled with explanations, each sentence written with the urgency of someone who had finally realized the weight of what they had done. He wrote about the chaos in the house, the arguments, the mistakes they had made, the stress of juggling jobs and childcare, the exhaustion they had never felt before because they had relied on me far more than they ever acknowledged. He said they missed me. He said the house felt empty without my presence. He said my granddaughter kept asking where I was. He said he had not understood how much I did for them until everything began to fall apart. He said he was ashamed. I read every word slowly, my heart squeezing tighter with each line. I did not reply, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed time to understand whether the message came from genuine remorse or desperation born out of hardship. People can mistake regret for inconvenience. I needed to know which one was speaking through his words. 2 days later, the first lesson of life's quiet justice arrived at their doorstep. My sister's neighbor, who worked at the same office as my son's wife, mentioned that she had been reprimanded for missing important deadlines and showing up late repeatedly. With no childcare and no support, she had begun unraveling professionally. My son, meanwhile, had been offered overtime he could not accept because he had no one to watch the baby. Their carefully constructed life had begun to tilt, each piece sliding slowly off balance, their confidence eroding under the strain. Still, I stayed silent. The truth is, mothers often hold a family together in ways no one notices until the structure begins to crack. We are the quiet threads that keep the seams from splitting. When that thread is pulled out, the entire pattern begins to unravel. And theirs was unraveling quickly. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft shades of pink and gray, my sister stepped into my room holding a small envelope. She said it had been slipped under the door. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling even before I saw the handwriting inside. It was my son's. The letter was short, unsteady, written in a voice I barely recognized. He begged me to come home, not to help, not to clean, not to babysit. He begged me to come home because he did not know how to live without me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in my hands, the ache inside me shifting into something deeper and more complicated. I did not know how to respond. I did not know whether forgiveness was a door I could open without reopening the wound beneath it. I did not know whether I was ready to step back into a home that had cast me onto the street, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Their life was falling apart without me, piece by piece, day by day, and they were starting to realize it. I placed the letter on my lap, smoothing its creased edges with trembling fingers, reading the words again and again, as if repetition might unlock clarity, instead of tightening the ache that spread slowly through my chest. It was the kind of letter written, not with confidence, but with desperation, the handwriting uneven, the ink smudged in some places as though his hand had shaken while writing it. My son had never been a man who admitted weakness easily. He had built his adult life around the illusion of competence, around the belief that he needed no one, around the pride of standing tall even when the ground beneath him cracked. And yet the letter in my hand was the quiet confession of someone whose pride had finally collapsed under the weight of realities he had never considered. I folded the paper carefully and set it beside me, staring at the wall as memories surfaced like slow-moving shadows. Memories of the nights I stayed awake to soothe his infant cries. Memories of the mornings I walked him to school in the rain while he clung to my coat. Memories of the young man he grew into, the one who believed he could conquer the world without looking back. And memories of the cold morning when he placed my suitcases on the street without giving me the chance to say goodbye to the home I had loved. The conflict inside me swelled like a tide that refused to settle. Part of me longed to run to him, to hold his face between my hands, to tell him everything would be all right, to step into the home I once nurtured. The other part of me, the part still raw with hurt, whispered caution. A mother's love is deep and forgiving, but forgiveness cannot bloom in soil still poisoned by betrayal. I needed time, not to punish him, not to triumph in his downfall, but to understand whether returning would heal something or break me all over again. My sister watched me from the doorway, her expression soft and knowing. She did not urge me to go. She did not tell me to stay. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and left me alone with my thoughts. Later that evening, as the sky deepened into a dark velvet blue, my phone buzzed with another message. This time it was from my son's wife, her words as delicate as they were desperate. She wrote that they were overwhelmed. She wrote that the baby cried constantly. She wrote that they had not slept properly in weeks. She wrote that they were behind on bills. She wrote that the house was in disarray. She wrote that my son had broken down in tears earlier that day, something he had not done since he was a child. She wrote that she now understood how much I had carried, how quietly, how willingly, how thanklessly. She wrote that she had been wrong about many things, that independence was not the victory she thought it was, that they had taken me for granted, that they needed me. Not as a helper, not as a convenience, not as a live and caretaker, but as a mother whose presence steadied everything. I read her message slowly, feeling its sincerity, its vulnerability, its regret. But regret does not erase the image of suitcases on the street. Regret does not undo the sting of rejection. Regret does not mend the wound without leaving a scar. I did not respond. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the world continued with its quiet indifference. Cars passed. A couple walked a dog. A child rode a bicycle down the sidewalk, laughter echoing faintly through the night air. Life moved on even as mine felt suspended between two worlds. 3 days passed before I received another call. This time it was my granddaughter's small, trembling voice asking if I had gone on a very long trip. She asked if I was coming back. She asked why I had not read the storybook she left on the kitchen table. She asked why her father cried last night. The innocence in her questions struck me harder than any adult apology could. I wanted to answer her with the gentleness she deserved. I wanted to tell her the truth without breaking her heart. But before I could speak, her mother's voice appeared in the background, tense and tired, asking gently for the phone. The call ended abruptly. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. That night, sleep escaped me. I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the old house settling, the faint rustle of leaves outside the window. My mind wandered back to my son's childhood, to the sacrifices I had made without hesitation, to the love I had poured into his life like water into dry soil. I remembered the times he had failed, the times he had been scared, the times he had needed me. I remembered how I always showed up, always, without conditions, without expecting gratitude, without questioning whether my presence was wanted. I had been his foundation long before he understood what foundations were. But he had taken that foundation and tossed it aside as if it were a rug he no longer liked beneath his feet. The next morning, as sunlight slipped into the room in thin golden strands, a knock sounded at the front door. My sister answered it, her voice carrying a note of surprise. When I stepped into the hallway, I froze. My son stood there on the porch, unshaven, exhausted, clothes wrinkled, eyes red from sleepless nights. His wife stood beside him, holding their daughter, who looked equally tired, her small arms wrapped around her mother's neck. My son looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not defensiveness. Something deeper, something vulnerable, something heavy with realization. He took one step forward, then another, as though each movement weighed more than the last. When he finally reached me, his voice broke into a shattering whisper. "Mom, we made a mistake. A terrible mistake." He lowered his gaze, tears spilling onto his cheeks with sudden intensity. "We thought we could build a life without you. We thought we were strong enough. We thought we knew what we were doing. But every day since you left, we have been falling apart. We cannot do this. We cannot be a family without you." His wife stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes as she held out their daughter, who reached toward me with tiny trembling arms. "Please come back. We need you. She needs you." My granddaughter's small voice whispered my name, and in that moment something inside me cracked open. Not in weakness, not in surrender, but in profound understanding. They had finally seen the truth that life had been trying to teach them, that a mother's presence is not a burden. It is a blessing they had tossed away carelessly. But a mother who has been pushed onto the street cannot walk back into a home without consideration. Her heart needs assurance. Her dignity needs protection. Her wounds need time. I looked at them silently, taking in every detail, every tear, every regret etched into their faces. And I knew. I would forgive them, but I would not return easily, because the next steps would not be theirs alone to decide. My breath felt caught somewhere between my ribs as the three of them stood on my sister's porch, clinging to each other in a trembling cluster of guilt and exhaustion, as though the weight of their unraveling lives had finally pressed them into the truth they had been running from. My son took another step closer, but I instinctively moved slightly back, not in anger, but in a soft recoil of self-protection, the reflex of someone who had learned that love can wound without warning. He noticed the hesitation immediately, and something inside him seemed to collapse. His shoulders slumped, his face twisted with shame, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my legs whenever he broke something he could not fix on his own. He whispered that he understood if I never forgave them, that he did not deserve forgiveness, that he had allowed his pride to poison everything he loved. His wife stood silently beside him, nodding in agreement, a tear sliding down her cheek as she bounced their daughter gently, trying to soothe the restless child whose eyes darted between all the adults, sensing the tension even in her small innocence. My granddaughter reached out again, calling my name with the fragile hope only a child could carry, and the sound of her voice pierced through the wall I had built inside myself since that morning on the street. I told them to come inside because I could not bear the idea of our pain playing out on the porch where neighbors watched with curious glances. They stepped into my sister's living room with the hesitance of people entering sacred ground, their movements small and cautious, their eyes lowered, as if afraid they might break something simply by breathing too loudly. I sat in the armchair near the window while they sat together on the couch, my son gripping his wife's hand as though letting go might send everything spiraling again. The room felt too quiet, too heavy, too full of words none of us knew how to begin. Finally, my son lifted his gaze, meeting mine with a rawness that made my throat tighten. He confessed that things had fallen apart much faster than they admitted. He said bills piled up because they did not know how to manage them without me reminding them. He said their daughter cried for hours because she missed the rhythm I had brought to her life, the songs I hummed, the way I held her, the comfort only a grandmother could give. He said they fought constantly because the house was messy, the meals unprepared, the routines shattered, and their patience thinning like old fabric pulled too tight. He said they realized too late that independence without wisdom was just chaos wearing confidence like a costume. His wife spoke next, her voice trembling as she admitted how wrong she had been. She said she thought my presence made her feel small because I did everything better than she could. She said she mistook help for control, guidance for interference, love for intrusion. She said she pushed me away because she was insecure, overwhelmed, terrified of being seen as a failure in her own home. She said she had been foolish and selfish. She said she finally understood that a home does not grow stronger by cutting away the roots that hold it steady. Her words flowed like a confession from someone who had been humbled by consequences she never imagined. I listened, absorbing each word, my heart tugging painfully as the truth settled between us like a fragile offering. Then my granddaughter leaned across her mother's lap and whispered in her small, trembling voice that she wanted to go home and asked why I could not come. I looked at her sweet face, the innocence still unbroken by adult mistakes, and something inside me softened. My granddaughter had never hurt me. My granddaughter had never betrayed me. She simply loved. I opened my arms and she climbed into them, resting her head against my chest with a sigh that felt like a warm tide washing over cold stones. I held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, the softness of her tiny hands pressed against my arm, and in that moment I realized that despite everything, my love for her had not dimmed even a fraction. My son watched us with eyes full of grief and longing, his voice cracking as he whispered that he did not expect a decision today, that he only hoped I would consider giving them a chance to make things right. He said he would go to therapy. He said he would change his behavior. He said he would rebuild trust slowly, day by day, without asking for shortcuts. He said he would take responsibility for every wound he caused. His wife echoed the same, promising to treat me with respect, to listen instead of judge, to value instead of resent, to acknowledge instead of demand. They were not asking for me to come back and fix their lives. They were asking for the chance to fix themselves. I sat there in silence, holding my granddaughter, feeling her heartbeat against mine. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. It was not forgiveness yet. It was not acceptance. It was the beginning of understanding. The first crack of light in a long tunnel. I told them I needed time. I told them trust is not rebuilt in a single apology. I told them wounds do not close simply because someone suddenly regrets causing them. I told them I would think about it. My son nodded slowly, tears falling freely this time, his wife pressing her forehead against her palms in relief and sorrow mingled together. They stood to leave, but before they reached the door, my granddaughter turned back and kissed my cheek, her small voice whispering that she loved me. When the door closed behind them, I felt my heart tremble in a way that was both painful and hopeful. Because for the first time since they placed my suitcases on the street, I realized something unexpected. They were not the same people who had thrown me out. Life had humbled them. Life had changed them. Life had taught them what I could not make them see. And now they stood on the edge of a transformation they never anticipated. The true question lingering in my mind was simple yet heavy. Would I allow myself to walk beside them again? And what would happen if I did? The house felt strangely quiet after they left, as if their apologies, their tears, and the raw vulnerability they spilled into the room still lingered in the air long after the door had closed. I sat there for a long while, the faint warmth of my granddaughter's embrace still resting on my arms like a soft imprint of a past I wasn't sure I could return to. My sister stepped into the room with slow, careful footsteps, carrying the kind of silence that only someone who understands the fragility of another person's heart can offer. She didn't ask what I planned to do, because she knew the answer wasn't something that could be reached in a single breath. Instead, she placed a cup of tea on the table beside me, the steam rising in gentle spirals as if urging me to exhale everything I had been holding in. I sat with it untouched, staring at the faint ripples along the surface of the liquid, each one reflecting the uncertainty spiraling inside me. Days passed in the same fragile rhythm. Every morning I woke with the taste of old pain still lingering, and every night I lay awake thinking about the faces of my family as they stood on that porch. There was something haunting in the image of my son, collapsing under the weight of regret, and something even more piercing in the memory of his wife's trembling voice as she admitted the truth she once refused to see. But even deeper than their sorrow was the sound of my granddaughter saying she missed me, the softness of her small hands, the innocence of her gaze. No matter how much hurt lived between the adults, she remained untouched by malice, tethering me to the possibility of return in a way no apology ever could. I avoided my phone for days, but messages continued to arrive. Not long letters now, just small, steady updates. My son wrote that he had taken unpaid time off to spend more time with the baby. He wrote that he had scheduled a therapy appointment. He wrote that he realized how much of his frustration came from trying to live a life based on pride rather than truth. His wife wrote too, each message softer and more humbled than the last. She said she was learning how to apologize without excusing herself. She said she had cooked dinner 3 nights in a row, but burned one dish completely, and cried afterward because she realized she had never appreciated how effortlessly I had made a home feel alive. She said she had been wrong about what strength looked like. For the first time, she said she wanted to learn from me instead of replacing me, but I did not reply, not out of cruelty, not out of spite, but because wounds must breathe before they can close. Whenever my sister caught me reading their messages, she didn't encourage or discourage me. She simply wrapped a blanket around my shoulders with motherly understanding, reminding me that heartbreak, even when inflicted by one's children, requires time to settle before clarity arrives. The stillness of those days gave me space to see something I had missed before. Their behavior had not come from hatred. It had come from immaturity, arrogance, and fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of adulthood, fear of not being good enough. They had pushed me out because they wanted to pretend they were already the people they hoped to become. But life had exposed the truth quickly, showing them that independence is not the removal of support, but the proper use of it. One afternoon, when the sun sat high in a cloudless sky, my sister and I walked to the corner shop for groceries. As we returned, bags in hand, a familiar car pulled onto her street. My stomach tightened when I saw it. My son stepped out, followed by his wife, who carried their daughter on her hip. They approached slowly, as though afraid to interrupt the fragile quiet of my new life. My granddaughter called out to me the moment she saw me, her voice bright and full of relief, and she stretched her little arms toward me until her mother gently put her down so she could run. I crouched to meet her, her small body colliding into mine with the force of pure love, her cheek pressed against my shoulder as she whispered over and over that she missed me. My son and his wife stopped a few feet away, waiting silently as I held the child who had no part in the mistakes that preceded this moment. When she finally pulled back, smiling through the softness of her innocence, I stood and looked at them. My son's eyes were swollen, the lids red, his hands clasped in front of him as if he were holding himself together by sheer will. His wife looked fragile but determined, her gaze steady despite the fear flickering beneath it. My son spoke first, his voice trembling in the cool afternoon air. "We are not here to beg. We are here to show you what we are doing to become better." He handed me a small stack of papers, not thrusting them into my hands, but offering them with gentle hesitation. They were therapy appointments, budgeting worksheets, meal planning notes, childcare schedules, and a letter he had written not to me but to himself, acknowledging his flaws, his mistakes, his pride, and the consequences of all three. His wife stepped forward next, holding something small and folded. When she opened it, I saw my granddaughter's drawings, each one featuring me in the center of their little family, smiling as though nothing had changed. The sight of those scribbled colors made my breath hitch. His wife then reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook filled with her handwriting. She said it was her journal. She said she had spent days writing down everything she regretted and everything she wanted to learn. She wrote about her pride, her insecurity, her fear of not being a good mother. She wrote about how she had resented the ease with which I cared for the home because it made her feel incompetent. She wrote about how badly she wanted to do better. She wrote that she had never grown up with a mother who cared, so she did not know how to accept care without feeling judged. She wrote that she now understood the difference between love and control. And she asked, with trembling honesty, if I would teach her how to create a real home. I stood there holding their papers, their confessions, their hopes, their fears, their attempts at change. The heaviness inside me shifted as I looked into their eyes. They were no longer the cold, proud couple who placed my suitcases on the street. They had been humbled, softened, reshaped by life's unforgiving lessons. They were ready not just to ask for forgiveness, but to earn it. For a long moment, I let the silence settle over us, testing the sincerity in their eyes. And then my son took a step toward me and whispered something that pierced deeper than any apology ever could. "We do not want you to come back because we need help. We want you to come back because we finally understand what family is." My granddaughter slipped her hand into mine, her small fingers curling around my palm with quiet certainty. I felt tears rising, not from pain this time, but from something gentler, something long overdue, something that felt like the first warm breeze after a long, bitter winter. I told them softly that forgiveness did not erase the past, but it could shape the future. And that was when my son said something that changed everything. "Mom, we want you to choose the new rules. We want to build our home around them." The moment my son said I could choose the rules, something inside me shifted in a way that no apology could have achieved on its own. It was not power he was offering me. It was acknowledgement. It was restoration of dignity. It was the silent recognition that I was not furniture to be removed when inconvenient, nor a shadow lingering too long in their space, but a foundation they had built their lives upon without ever admitting it. I stood there holding my granddaughter's small hand, while my son and his wife waited with a stillness that revealed how much they feared the possibility of my refusal. The wind rustled the leaves along the sidewalk, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and the warmth of the afternoon sun. For a few long heartbeats, we stood suspended between everything we had been through and everything we might become if we dared to start again. I asked them quietly what rules they meant, and my son stepped forward with a steadiness that had not existed in him before. He said the first rule was that I would never again be treated as a burden. The second was that my presence would be respected, not tolerated. The third was that decisions affecting the household would include me, because I had earned the right through years of dedication they had taken for granted. His wife added that she wanted to learn from me, but not rely on me blindly, that she wanted to build routines together, that she wanted to understand what it meant to create a real home rather than one that only looks stable from the outside. I listened carefully, weighing their words against the ache that still lingered in my chest. They were not begging for my labor. They were inviting me into their lives with humility instead of entitlement. They wanted partnership, not servitude. And something about the sincerity in their eyes made the heaviness inside me soften enough to breathe again. My granddaughter tugged gently on my hand and whispered that she made a bed for me with her stuffed animals and that she wanted me to see it. That small confession carried more purity than any adult apology could. I looked at her tiny face, full of hope and innocence, and I realized that the future she represented was worth more than the wounds the past had carved into me. But I also knew that forgiving did not mean forgetting, and returning did not mean erasing the hurt that had brought us all to this moment. So I told them calmly that I would come home, but not as the version of myself they once exploited. I would not be the caretaker who carried the entire household on her back while receiving nothing but quiet resentment in return. I would not be the woman who erased her boundaries just to keep the peace. I would not be the mother who sacrificed every part of her life just to be pushed aside when I became inconvenient. I would come home as an equal, as a guide, as a grandmother, as a mother with dignity. They nodded immediately, almost desperately, as though terrified I might change my mind. My sister watched from the doorway, arms folded but eyes softened by relief. She offered to help me pack my bags, and for the first time since that awful morning, the sight of my suitcases no longer felt like a symbol of rejection. They felt like a beginning. We returned inside briefly, and my granddaughter followed closely, helping me collect my belongings with the seriousness of someone carrying precious treasure. She placed each item gently into the suitcase, humming under her breath, unaware of how deeply each small gesture mended the crack inside my heart. When we stepped outside again, the sunlight stretched long across the street, casting shadows that looked less like memories of pain and more like reminders of how far I had come. My son lifted the heaviest suitcase without being asked. His wife grabbed the smaller one, and my granddaughter clung to my hand as if afraid I might disappear again. As we approached their car, I felt a strange mixture of hesitation and hope settle inside me. I paused before getting in, taking a slow breath, and looked at the home they had once thrown me out of. It had taken losing me to realize my value. It had taken watching their life crumble to understand what my presence had held together. The drive back to their house felt different this time. Quieter, more fragile, more honest. When we arrived, my son opened the door for me with gentle care, as though honoring an unspoken promise. The house looked the same from the outside, but when I stepped in, something felt profoundly different. It was not the furniture or the walls or the scent of the home. It was the atmosphere, the humility, the emptiness that spoke of nights filled with tears. The awareness that they had learned the hard way that independence without gratitude becomes a prison rather than a freedom. My granddaughter guided me to her room to show me the bed she made, a small arrangement of blankets and stuffed animals arranged with the love only a child could pour into something. I sat beside her, smoothing her hair as she talked excitedly about how she would read me her favorite book later. My son and his wife stood at the doorway, watching us with expressions that held a mixture of relief and reverence. They had not expected my return. They had not believed they deserved it. And that humility was the first true sign that something fundamental had changed. That evening, we cooked together for the first time since they pushed me out. My son chopped vegetables while his wife washed dishes, and I guided them gently with quiet instructions, watching their movements soften as they worked side by side. There was no resentment, no blame, no tension, only effort, only sincerity. Only the fragile rebuilding of a family that had nearly shattered itself through pride. After dinner, my son sat beside me on the couch and took my hand in his, something he had not done since he was a child. He thanked me softly for returning, for giving them a second chance, for choosing forgiveness even when they had not earned it. His wife sat on my other side, resting her head lightly on my shoulder, her voice trembling as she whispered that she would never again let her insecurity turn me into an enemy. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the family that once abandoned me, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not because the past was erased, but because the future had finally been rewritten. I looked at them, all of them, and realized that life had taken us down a harsh road only to bring us back to a place stronger than before. Sometimes families break so they can be rebuilt with wiser hands. Sometimes children must lose everything to understand the value of the mother they once discarded. Sometimes forgiveness is not a return to what was, but an invitation to what could be. And as I tucked my granddaughter into bed that night, whispering a lullaby she had missed more than she could express, I finally understood the quiet truth of it all. They had put my suitcases on the street, but they had never thrown away my worth. And now, piece by piece, they were learning how to cherish it. If this story stayed with you even for a moment, I invite you to follow the channel. Here we share stories that speak to the heart, stories about mothers, families, forgiveness, and the quiet things people never say out loud. If you want more long emotional journeys, more deep family truths, and more endings that mean something, follow. Your presence here truly matters.